In this episode, I speak with serial entrepreneur Sarah Davidson. She's the author of Seize the Yay, the book, and podcast host of Seize the Yay, the podcast. If you want to check her out, you can find out more there. But Sarah is an awesome example of what high functioning anxiety can look like when well managed and when not so well managed, as she shares her story in this episode today. She talks about how she experienced the fulfillment and satisfaction of a law career, as well as the parts that weren't so satisfying, and how sometimes we can have something feel right for us at that time in our lives and then go on to find something else is right for us in a different time of life, which I think is a really fascinating thing, because often there's this idea that if we're not feeling fulfilled in our job, we need to just quit it. And, everyone should be unfulfilled in a certain type of career, if you do work in corporate, for example. When, of course, this isn't the case. And for some of us, for certain times in our lives, that's the perfect thing. And maybe it is your whole life that's the perfect thing. And just really being authentic with yourself and choosing from that place is just that. It's checking in and asking those questions. What would really make me feel fulfilled and happy? And Sarah's got some amazing advice to share on that I'm excited for you to hear. Okay, let's go to the show. Sarah, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to chat to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat to you.
We were just chatting about how we had to reschedule this podcast a few times to get you here. So I'm really happy you're here and we've made it work. And we were saying do you really think it's just this year that's been crazy in terms of time, not knowing where we are in our lives? Or has it possibly always been this way?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because who even really remembers a world pre-COVID? I can't even recall basic things about life from before. But I think partly we've been coming towards, we've been gradually approaching being busier and fitting more into our lives than we ever have before, because just the tools that allow us to schedule things back to back and, even moving a lot of things into the virtual world last year also meant that we could even more just schedule so much in and not physically even move during the day and still be back to back. I think last year definitely moved us all into a totally different structure of life. So our whole understanding of time is going to be different now that we're coming back out into the world. But I also think it was coming a little bit beforehand as well I think, once upon a time when you had an appointment, there was no flexibility. Firstly, people would always honor it, but secondly, nothing could get in the way because life just was so certain. There was so much structure. There was so much ability to plan things in advance. Whereas I think because we've become we can contact each other so quickly. You can easily reschedule something. No one's life structure is predictable. Everyone's working on this uncertain career path, working weird hours, and we're all, sometimes interviewing each other from different continents on different time zones. And so the world generally, I think, is becoming more and more chaotic in terms of scheduling and time. And then COVID just added this whole extra layer of no one knowing how to factor in travel time to get to appointments. Who even knows how to be on time anymore? And then flexibility of just stuff coming up because we've all forgotten how to respect appointments and also how to plan in advance. And because things became really ad hoc, I think it was a wonderful thing last year in that things that would have taken a lot of planning, and we all would have had to have 7 business cases before we did a project. Last year we all were just let's just do it. Why not?
Yeah.
And we entered this world of possibility, which is amazing. But that kind of flippant, last minute, scrounge it together mentality has probably filtered back into our lives, even now that we aren't just living from our living rooms, and have made it I would never have a last minute shoot come up, 8 hours before I had to be there to cancel an appointment the next day. It just wouldn't, that wouldn't have happened because the project would have had to be booked so far in advance. So the spontaneity is quite extreme, which is good and bad.
And the good part, I think, is that we're all learning this resilience of just floating through the chaos and having to be flexible. I literally had an experience where I was running late, driving to a doctor's appointment, and I called the doctor's office, and then I was like, can we just make this a phone consult? And they were like, sure. So I had my consult through the phone while still driving. And it's like that flexibility is there. But you're right. Like, I totally did not manage my time, though I'm always late. Like, that's always a thing that I've had to struggle with. So I don't know if I can blame COVID for it.
Well, now you can. So you might as well use that to your benefit.
I'm going to use it. I think we got to use what we can, while also trying to keep our personal power. Oh, that's so true, Sarah. I just want everyone to know you and where you've come from. And, we were talking before about, I was saying, my people are these high functioning anxiety, like perfectionist, overachiever types. Not sure if you can relate. Tell me,
exactly
how do you relate to that? Tell us your life story. Take us back.
I could not relate to anything more. I think I need to have that on my business card. Not that any of us have business cards anymore. But I mean, taking it back right to the very beginning is probably what set me up to have that kind of A-type tendency to make the most of everything. I was born in an orphanage in South Korea and adopted by an amazing Australian family. Came here when I was 5 months old. So have no traumatic memory or experience with, I think it sounds like quite an intense start to your life, but of course I was 5 months old. I have no idea what it was actually like. And all I know is that I can only assume kind of the lessons that come from that without actually knowing that it's part of my identity. And one of the things that did come out of it is knowing how different it could have been, but for the action of one person, or but for one decision, or but for one small intervention in your life, how different your life could have turned out. Particularly for me, I was born into what was a third world country at the time, where women were not, afforded education, and there was a very heavy sex trade at the time for young women. And being able to grow up in the best country in the world, I think all of us should be reminded all the time that we're so lucky to live here, but let alone when you actually almost didn't have that chance. That's always made me very fascinated about sliding doors moments, and very over enthusiastic to make the most of every opportunity that I have here. So I think I was probably always going to be a bit A-type, over enthusiastic about doing life to its fullest, but that added a whole nother layer of make the most of this beautiful opportunity you've had to grow up in this country. So I've always done all the academics, all the art, all the sport, all the drama, all the way through primary school, high school, even university. I've always done as many things as I can. I had every extracurricular activity and 4 part-time jobs, and they were all in different industries. I've never been able to settle on just one thing, because there are so many opportunities to make the most of. So that A-type thing has driven me my whole entire life. And I think I had glandular fever the first time when I was 8, which is a bit of a sign that I like to overachieve even at burnout. A bit of an early bloomer into the
I think
burnout.
Glandular fever must be like a badge of honor for us A-types, right? I had it too.
Absolutely. I mean, at 8 years old as well, I'm like, oh, guys, I had it before anyone else even knew what it was.
That's very young. I mean, you couldn't have got it. Were you kissing boys at 8?
Well, I probably was. No, I wasn't. But I was, again, like I couldn't even do what most young girls do as a hobby. I couldn't even do ballet without turning it into a career. So I started at the Australian Ballet when I was younger, and was running this full-time career on the side of my schooling, and it just burnt me into the ground at obviously at such a young age, taking myself so seriously. And that continued. It continued all the way through school and high school. And it's hard when you're multi-interested and multi-passionate to ever forge a pathway and know what to choose when it comes to actually starting a career, because you can't really choose a career that's a bit of everything, or at least when you finish school, you don't know that that's possible. And when I finished school, it wasn't possible. There were a much more discrete number of careers, and the world wasn't as flexible as it is now. So I ended up choosing law as a default A-type. I got the score, and then I was like, well, I should do something really intellectual that's fancy and that other people think is successful.
Yeah. And other people will say like, wow, you're studying law.
Yeah. And there was no other factor in my decision making. There was no, what do you want to do? What are your strengths? I wouldn't even probably have indulged the idea that my creative side was stronger than my nerdy side, because the creative career path was just not seen as successful compared to a legal conventional career. And that certainly didn't come from family pressure. This was all just me putting that pressure on myself to make the most of, be the highest achieving that I possibly could be. What's the most difficult degree to get into? In law, I still kind of tried to keep that balance alive. So I did arts law and did languages and lots of exchanges. But when it really came down to like, what career am I going to do? I wanted to start at a top tier law firm. So I ended up getting into a wonderful firm. I don't regret any of the time I spent there. I invested a good, third of my life, a decade on studying and then working at a law firm. And what makes me really, it gives me goosebumps now is that I wasn't one of those corporates that hated it. I didn't quit because I burnt out. I was actually really gratified by how successful it was. I got off on how productive it felt. There was such a clear hierarchy and corporate ladder to climb. There was such a reward system for working really hard. You'd get promoted. There were really clear metrics to measure how well you were doing and how much you progressed from the year before. And that satisfied a really big part of my personality. So I think but for the second biggest sliding doors moment in my life, I never would have left. And I would have ended up 10, 20 years, 30 years down this pathway, not realizing that it wasn't bad for me, but it wasn't my best application of who I am. And it was only because I ended up in all places of Rwanda in Africa. My now husband has a creative agency, and we got to work in a school for a month there that he had helped sponsor. And two things happened there. One, for an A-type person to encounter a population that didn't have any of the characteristics or markers of success, but to see them actually happier than any of the children or people back home. They would play with a leaf for 12 hours. They'd break into song because they couldn't contain the joy of seeing each other in their bodies. And it didn't make sense to me because I'm like, you guys, we've got all the stuff. We've got all the things and all the prospects. And yet we're only just creating more anxiety for ourselves about having more. You have nothing and you are so joyful and you have found such pure happiness that you taught me about the meaning of happiness. Like that was the first inkling that success and happiness weren't the same. And then the next thing I brought home was a gut parasite, which again, being in true A-type, I got off the plane, went straight back to work, didn't take any time off. First 5 kilos, great way to lose pounds. And then the next 10 kilos, again, I ignored until I collapsed literally in the middle of a meeting at work with adrenal fatigue.
So this parasite was literally consuming your nutrients for you.
Literally. I mean, it was fun for a little while and then it just
fun.
I mean, like before I knew it was a parasite, I was like, oh, I'm in shape. And then
like naturally just the weight's just falling.
Shredding. And in that process, I think all A-type personalities will have one big confronting disaster that really shows you that you have limits that you don't want to admit, refuse to accept, and it's extremely inconvenient for all the things you want to squeeze into your life. But I had to learn very quickly that health is not as superficial as eat a broccoli, do a spin class at 5:30. There's sleep and rest and meditation and being kind to your brain. There's emotional wellness. There's all kinds of things I wasn't making time for. And one of my vices at the time was 10 cups of coffee a day, which with adrenal fatigue, I had to give up. 10. Wow. I could still sleep. I was fine. I loved it.
Oh my gosh.
But
Sarah, you give me 1 cup and I'm like shaking. So
that's me now. But at the time, I mean, that's how compromised my body was, that it could survive on that because I was working such long hours and I built a tolerance obviously to any, form of stimulant that I could still sleep at the end of the day. And I was just sort of pushing my body to its limits like that until obviously it crashed underneath me. And it was only through that experience and finding a healthier form of caffeination when I got sent to the firm's headquarters in Hong Kong that I discovered matcha powder. And so our first business only came about because of my own selfish need to source this beautiful green powder that the Kardashians were drinking, Victoria's Secret angels were drinking, but it hadn't been branded. It was just like sugar. It was a generic ingredient. It wasn't cool. It wasn't available online. It was really hard to find, but everyone knew the health benefits of it. And just in, again, another big sliding doors moment, I happened to discover a need for it that happened to be a gap I wasn't the only one in the world experiencing. So by closing it as a bit of a, creative project or hobby or side hustle or whatever you want to call it, never expecting it would go any further than just selling a few bags to our family and friends to make back some money from the matcha that we brought for ourselves. My husband and I started a business together. And I think sometimes it's not until you see, by contrast, what your true purpose looks like, that everything you've been doing up until that point starts to pale in comparison. And so, what I thought was happiness and fulfillment and success, which is for so many people, but not for me, as soon as I let that creative side of my brain come back to life, I was like, this is what I've been missing out on. This part of me has been slowly dying. I've been stifling it for 3 to maybe more years. But now that it's back out, I feel that sense of joy, that excitement, those goosebumps and the jitters and the butterflies when you're just so excited about life. And in that process, I realized that not only had I discovered a whole pivot in life focus, but it actually went well enough that 6 months later, I was able to leave the firm and make the transition permanent, which was 6 years ago now. And yeah, another big example, I think, of the fact that now I'm passionate about catching people when they're on that productivity hamster wheel and when they are finding themselves glorifying busy and going after milestones and metrics of success that aren't aligned with them, breaking that autopilot circuit and getting them to simply ask the question, is this my best life? And if it is, and you go back to exactly the same life as you had before, amazing. I don't want everyone to go and leave their jobs. I just want people to stop and take a moment to even investigate. Am I here by default, or am I here because I made some conscious choices? And do I have any element of like, am I doing this because this is the life that I think looks good on someone else? Or am I paying attention to what suits me best? Because the only person whose life needs to reflect your strengths and passions and joy is you.
Yeah. And it's like exploring those limitations, right? Because even now, with all that you've been through, and me too, and our awareness of these things, there'll be things we're still limiting ourselves on, areas where we think, oh, well, that's the limit, that's it, when that may not be the case. And there may well be something more to see. And I think I can totally agree with you. It's just asking the question, am I chasing my tail here and just doing something because that's the only way I can do it, and that's what I've been told, and that's what I believe? Or are there some other options possibly? And would those other options feel good?
And even within your own life, it doesn't have to be you versus someone else in a corporate career. Even like me then to me now, I think one of the things that we get very fixated on, because we're so focused on the destination, like we just want to, the instant gratuity of our generation is like, I want to get to the end. I want to know my purpose. I want to find happiness. I want to arrive there, and then I'm there. But if you're only destination focused, you'll never be satisfied, because you'll get there and then where's the next destination? And if you're not enjoying the process, like it's the wrong way to think about it. You're preempting the end when actually there is no end. At every different stage of your life, what your best life structure is going to look different for you. So law, I never regret that. And if I had tried to start a business before that, I wouldn't have been mature enough. I wouldn't have had the skills or the confidence. I would have been far too young. The world wouldn't have been ready for startups the way it was by the time I started. No chapter is a waste, even if it's not one that you end up staying in. And even once I moved into business with Matcha, at about the 3 to 4 to even 5 year mark, it started to feel like maybe this isn't the right chapter for me anymore. Like you're constantly evolving. And by looking for this one best life and thinking you're going to arrive there and it's static and it's never going to change, it leaves you in a state that means you won't constantly grow, but you're meant to evolve and outgrow your own chapters all the time. And that's part of life.
Yeah. And you have just recently kind of concluded that matcha chapter, right?
Yeah, we just sold a couple of months ago, and that took about a year and a half from that first inkling that, I think you start to feel when a chapter is coming to maybe not even an end, but just an evolution. Once you step out of your comfort zone, inevitably, as you move further and further into repeating that new stuff, you're going to get comfortable there too. And you have to keep taking new steps to make sure that you're evolving. So after 4 years, that was longer than I'd been at the law firm. So of course I was going to start to feel a little bit more comfortable and accomplished as a business person. And by then, my role had changed dramatically. The business had changed dramatically. And it came time again when you start to feel that niggle of something's missing. I sort of, instead of thinking of my yay or my ultimate joyful life as a destination, I see it now as a jigsaw puzzle that's meant to look different all the time. And every experience you do, you're either adding new pieces that suit you better or you're getting rid of old ones that don't suit anymore. So I started to think something's missing here. There's a big element of girliness and fluffiness and also rawness that isn't appropriate to share through a health food business. You can't talk about, you're not getting your order today because I'm in a fetal position with my period, or I'm having a moment of self-doubt, or I had an anxiety attack. It's not appropriate to share that on your business product page. So I started to think, where can those conversations live? And my new evolution has been towards this concept of helping people find their yay. But again, I couldn't have skipped to that from the start. I had to go through all these little different chapters to figure out where that is. And then it took 2 or 3 years to kind of maneuver into podcast land. Then a book came 2 years later. And even now, I still don't know where that's going. But if you see your pathway as this constantly evolving, ever-changing, dynamic thing, then you can enjoy it for what it is and not be so worried that there's uncertainty, because there's always going to be uncertainty.
This is the thing I wanted to ask you, because if we looked at your life, right, it does look like, if we look at the journey, it's almost like we just plotted out this perfect arc of like character development, obstacles to overcome. She triumphed, and it's all just worked out perfectly. But I was going to say, where do you see things going next? And it sounds like, well, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think once upon a time, I only made decisions based on this pre-set pathway that was, it's a very, very beaten path. In law, you go into a career and you know what first year, second year, third year, all the way to partnership looks like. Between all firms all around the world, it's pretty similar. So even though you are learning and there are lots of different diversions and ways you can challenge yourself along the way, it's a pretty stable, certainty-based career. And part of my brain does like that because it's comfortable and because there is stability in a world that's quite chaotic. But I had to shed that skin. I had to lose that part of me, because what made me a good lawyer was being risk averse and finding everything that could go wrong and avoiding it at all costs. The only way to survive business is to be the opposite of that, is to have a thirst and appetite for risk, and to be okay with complete uncertainty, because you can't be open to the possibility that things will go amazingly if you're not also open to the possibility that they might not. You can't, the impossible can't happen if you've already planned out how things are going to end. So I've kind of like gone from knowing exactly what my next step is to actually detaching so much from the destination that I never know what the next step is. And in this day and age, maybe not in any other generation, but the world right now is moving so fast that a COVID alone has proven that if you had a 2-year plan, at least one of those years would be wasted. That planning, you have no idea. You're planning for a climate that you cannot even predict, because the world's moving so quickly that all of the criteria and all of the dot points that you base that plan on are probably going to shift anyway. So the best thing you can be is agile. And of course I have like big, vague goals of what I want. But for the first time in a really long time, I don't know what's coming next. I'm okay with Seize the Yay being a project that helped me morph from the Matcha mission to a bigger vision of overall life structure and helping other people change their pathway generally, not just interacting with people based on a product interaction, but a whole of life discussion and conversation. And, I often say that your why will stay the same, but your how will have to change. So it started as a podcast. At the end of last year, it became a book. I didn't know that was going to happen. It just launched in the US. I also didn't know that was going to happen. I have no idea what the next iteration of, or the different form of delivery that will take. But I think once you get a little bit addicted to that, once you first get into this open-minded, throw caution to the wind, see what comes next kind of mentality, it's really addictive to just be like, I'm just going to see. I'm just going to see what comes next. I'm not going to over engineer it. I'm not going to overthink it. I genuinely couldn't tell you what is going to be the next chapter. And it's been really liberating to not have that intense attachment to certainty. And I think it made COVID a lot easier to mentally get through because I wasn't having to unattach from all these plans and hopes and dreams because I didn't have any. So
What I'm hearing in you and the way your because it's like your relationship with uncertainty has completely evolved to a place where you're like, uncertainty is friendly. It's not this big, scary monster. And it sounds like I'm sensing there is certainty within you, but it's not coming from outside you. It's not coming from what happens in the future that's going to give you the certainty or the outside world. It's something that's within you. Can you share more about what you feel is certain within yourself that you can rely on, or where you get that security from within you and how you respond in the world?
that's such an interesting way of looking at it. And I've never thought of that before. But I think it comes from practice. Firstly, I think people get very bogged down in the way that they think, and they're sort of like, oh, well, I'm a certainty loving person, so I'm never going to have that kind of appetite for risk. Well, if you'd met me, 6 years ago, you would have thought exactly the same. I love dot points and calendarizing, and I had a 10-year plan and a 20-year plan. And there is actual scientific research that you can rewire your neural pathways in your brain. So, firstly, you can always outgrow a thinking pattern that isn't useful to you anymore. And it can be the other way around. If you want to go from something that's chaotic towards a more certainty based career, you can absolutely do that too. No matter what you need at whatever time of your life, you can adjust your brain with enough practice. I think because I did experiment so much with seeing what happens when you don't have a plan and proving over time that really amazing things can happen. Of course, lots of terrible things happen when you don't plan, and we've had plenty of those as well. But by leaving room for adventures or ideas to come and hit you at a time where you never thought they would, in places you never thought you'd go, at times you just couldn't have ever envisioned, like the cafe, for example. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought I'd open a hospitality venue. Never in my wildest dreams would I think I would have had a podcast. I'd never listened to one before I started it. But because I hadn't stuck so rigidly to, I need to write a book, and then we need to get into supermarkets for Matcha, and then it needs to scale to this level, sometimes you get too fixated on the plan and you exclude the possibility of anything else happening. But by going with the flow, my brain has had space to think about what's going to come next and then let it come, and to have an idea. Like, we met one of our now business partner. We were traveling in the States. He's a hospitality heavyweight. He's got lots of venues. He was looking at the food. We were there for Matcha, looking at the drinks. The cafe idea literally came out of us cafe hopping in the States and seeing a big gap in the market. 3 months later, we opened one, and it was just sort of like, let's see what happens. And I think what accompanies that increased level of comfort for uncertainty is a belief that what's the worst that can happen? And what stops you most of the time is fear about what could happen. But if you actually put a name on what could happen and think about the actual financial implications of what would be the worst case scenario, you realize most of the time it's not that bad. Like, sure, you might lose a little bit of money and you look a little bit silly because you've gone and done this big launch, but you get over it. Like, the worst case scenario is not that you're going to die most of the time. These business ideas, we just get scared to look like a failure. That's all it is. But if you put your ego aside and you also get that risk appetite going, you realize, oh, well, yes, I could risk looking a bit silly and, taking a backward step and losing some money. I also could risk it going really well, which then sometimes it does. Most of the time it does. So I think trying uncertainty on for size and seeing how cool it can be when you do just leave the doors open to anything and the things that come through those doors that you never would have expected. It's a spontaneous person's world right now. The opportunities, like we were talking about before, they are coming out of nowhere. And because there's nothing that I'm so attached to that I can't say yes. I can be a yes person at the moment. And who knows where that's going to lead. And you'll meet someone, or, it might be like 5 steps down the road. You say yes to something and that introduces you to this person. And then you guys have this conversation. And then suddenly, in 2 months' time, you've got a business partner. You just never know what's going to happen. So,
Yeah. I can see you've developed this internal certainty within yourself from I can say yes. I can be a spontaneous person. You probably weren't always a spontaneous person, but when you know you can do that, spontaneity is about like dancing with what's currently happening, being in the current moment, no matter what's going on, you can kind of like respond to it, work with it. And when you know you can do that, it doesn't matter what happens, right? And we start to get this sense of
yeah.
like, ah, like I know personally, I've gone through stuff where I thought it would have broken me. Or if you told me that was coming before it happened, I would have gone, oh God, how would I ever survive that? And I've survived it and managed it. And I know that the hope in me, the part of me that hopes, the part of me that dreams and has these wild ideas and imagination about what's possible, can't be killed. It
Mm.
can't be killed. Life has tried and it just bounces right back. So having that and knowing that from going through difficult things has given me this internal certainty that life can try again, and I'm sure it will, but I'll bounce right back. And, you've beautifully appeased your mind and the fear in your mind of the uncertainty and the risk by actually creating almost like this internal reward system, or seeing an accumulation of evidence that when you take a risk, often good things happen too. Often, not always, but
Mm.
the chances of good things happening are also there. And so this becomes exciting as opposed to scary.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is to just get real about what the actual downside is. Because if you don't actually think that scenario through to its real life possible conclusion, then it's always going to seem inflated, because you're always going to think it's bigger than it actually is until you put a number on it, or how much are you willing to risk. And I think when you really let yourself do that, you realize most of the time it's a temporary loss of money or a temporary embarrassment. And I think we're more scared to look like we failed than we are to actually fail. If you knew that you could try something and fail and no one would ever be the wiser, I don't think any of us would worry about it. It's more that you think someone will know that you failed and then you'll look silly. If you could
Yeah.
fail it in private, then we would all take all kinds of risks. No one would be scared because it's such a perception thing. And I
Yeah.
think once you also realize that, I was just talking to someone about this earlier today, that the people who get the furthest are not the people who are the best at doing the stuff. They're the best at getting their mind in the game to do the stuff.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame that some of the people who are the best at doing the stuff don't get to do it because they can't get their mindset right. Not because they aren't going to be better than all of us at business, but because their self-doubt conquers them, or because the imposter syndrome, they don't have the tools to get rid of it. And so I actually think business is like 80% your mindset and 20% of actually doing the things. You've got to be able to get your head right because you don't have the safety of a structure, of a boss, of a salary, of certainty, of a trajectory that's set out really clearly. So it's all about creating those internal strategies or internal certainties for yourself, so that when the bad times come or the negative thoughts come, you're not a victim to them. You're not being pulled in all different directions. You can kind of have this solid trunk within you to be like, yeah, okay, like it's a really tumultuous roller coaster of an experience, but so's life. This day and age, even in stable industries, you don't have stability. There really is no certainty. You
Yeah.
might as you might as well not have certainty in a way that you want to not have certainty, rather than not having certainty and not enjoying it.
Yeah. And it's like, what's that quote? Floating around on Instagram. There are people far less qualified than you, far less talented and skilled, doing what you want to do simply because they believed in themselves and they just did it. They just went for it. They just took the opportunity.
Absolutely. And that's the greatest shame, I think, that if ever you don't go ahead with an idea, let it be because you tried it and it didn't work and you had to tweak it. You never want to ever look back and think, that could have been the Uber, or that could have been the front body, but it was my own brain that stopped me from doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And for someone who is just coming around to this idea that maybe there could be something else that they could be doing, maybe there is another way they could be seeing their life or a purpose waiting to unfold for them, what would be some advice you would give that person?
Yeah,
And they're
that's
in
a
their comfort zone. They're in their comfort zone right now, but they're kind of like not so comfortable in it because they're not feeling joyful and fulfilled.
great question. Firstly, I would say there is a very modern day perception that you have to be passionate about your job. And if you're not happy with it all the time, you should leave. And even being someone who has immensely benefited from leaving a job I wasn't super thrilled with and finding a job that I love every single day, even being one of the people who benefit from that belief, I still think that work is called work for a reason. And the reality of life in every other generation has been people go to work because they have bills to pay and they have to survive. So if you're not thrilled with your job, it's a huge privilege, but not an automatic assumption that you're going to love it every day.
Yeah.
So there is a chance that you might be one of those people who needs to find your joy outside of work. So if you find yourself not super fascinated and stimulated with your job, investigate the idea that maybe it's because you don't have hobbies. Maybe you haven't found enough of a joy or happiness practice in your downtime, because when you do, that's contagious, and then your job is okay and you can sit with that discomfort more because you're excited to get home to do the things that you want to do. So for a lot of artists who love, they're passionate about music or design, sometimes they think that they need to do that as their job. And with a budget and a deadline and someone else's brief, it kills the joy. So there are people out there who have to do their joy not as a job. So your work is not the only place that you can find it. When it comes to actually finding it, whether or not it's in work, like no matter where it is, you'd be surprised how detached a human can become from their own likes and dislikes, because we spend so long letting societal norms and expectations and concepts of success blur and muddy those waters. So as much as I want to be able to tell you that there's a quick way to find the answer, like everything, it's a process. Don't rush yourself. Don't necessarily rush to leave your job because you're not happy. Wait until you have something to leave to. It requires a lot of patience. And I had to treat myself as a research project, because when someone asked me, what are you passionate about? Or what do you even like? Couldn't even answer, because all I did was go to work and sleep to go back to work. I had no idea what activities I liked and what activities I didn't like until I started making time for them again and started researching, when do I feel happy? When do I forget what time it is? How often do I feel that feeling? And then starting to circle the activities that came up the most. Like I fully had to deduct my own likes based on a notebook, like I was a guinea pig. But that's how painstaking it can be to formulate an idea of what you are missing from your life and what you need more of.
And that's a really potent exercise to do. So anyone listening, like go write that down, go write down the list of all the things you like, the times where you notice times just passing by and you haven't noticed because you've been having fun.
Yeah. And then the big thing is like translating that into an action point is also really difficult. And for many people, they want it to be like a new career, like a whole new revamped life. But sometimes it's in the small tweaks. Sometimes it's moving into a different role within the one organization. Sometimes it's going down to 4 days so you can do something on your one day. Sometimes it's moving companies, but in the same role. Like it doesn't have to be leave corporate to start a business. It can be anything. It could be any small tweak in your life that suits you better. And I think we are so bogged down by comparison because the details of everyone's lives are so obvious that we see these stock standard happiness formulas and think, oh, I've got to try that on for size. But I know people who, if they left corporate, would be so unhappy. Business doesn't suit everyone. So just because it's the dream, it's been made really trendy in this generation, doesn't mean that's the answer to happiness or to finding a life that makes you really passionate. The only person's data you need to listen to is your own. And the only way you can get that data is by experimenting more. So just spend some time putting information together and then go through all the chapters that it's going to take you of trying things on for size. So I would have thought matcha was my big answer. I have moved from corporate to business. I am going to be a food entrepreneur. And I did all these kinds of, incubators and networked in the food space. And we did an incubator with Chobani, and like that was my path. And then I was like, this is just a chapter. It's just a stepping stone to the next chapter, which is Seize the Yay, which I couldn't have sped up. I couldn't have figured out any earlier than the minute that it hit me. So let things unravel in steps. Don't just rush to the end. And if it's a side hustle that never becomes full time, that's a step too.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh, your dog's in the background. He's so cute.
Oh, sorry.
I've got a golden retriever too.
Oh my gosh. They're the best. So that's my yay, is having a golden retriever.
I was gonna say, even there is his little face. You've got him now. Oh my gosh, he's so cute.
His name's Paul.
Paul, what a good name. So, just bringing us back, that feeling of what I love about the advice you just gave is that even the moment of shifting into curiosity of what could it be, exploring, taking little, like dipping your toe in the water. What does this feel like? What does that feel like? Does that light me up? Does that feel joyful? Does that feel interesting? Even that shifts you into a whole new state that is going to make your current situation feel better, no matter where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, again, you might not need to change anything that you're doing. You might just change the way that you do it. You might change the time you get up in the morning. You might change how much you exercise during the week. It's a constant process of just tweaking your formula to feel the best you day to day.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of making decisions on a really macro scale that are grand and that change your title or that change your situation in life. But actually the only change that matters is the things that change your day-to-day experience.
Definitely. It could be like, I mean, I went through this just last year. I curiously explored, what would it be like if I was a person who had cold showers every day? And I didn't like the cold, Sarah. It wasn't my thing, but I made myself like it. I made myself explore that. And now I'm like, oh, cool. I'm a person that likes cold showers now.
Totally. And like the other day, all my closest friends know the two things I hate the most are being wet and being cold. And waking up early, sorry, 3. And one of my really good friends has been finding enormous joy in waking up before sunrise and experiencing sunrise in the ocean. So I was like, well, I hate those 3 things, but I should probably make myself do them just to see if I can or if I like it. And I loved it. It was amazing. And so it's never not okay to change your mind as well. And at different chapters, you might think, oh, I tried pottery like 18 years ago and I didn't like it. It's like, well, that was 18 years ago. Pottery's come a long way, guys. Like, give it another chance. Just always, always be open-minded to new experiences. And you can't say you don't like something, honestly, unless you've tried it.
And that's just one example of how much like joy and fun is there in our lives, waiting for us to go and discover it. If we'll just have that crack of the door open to the possibility of trying it and seeing if it's there.
Absolutely.
I've got a fun question for you. I've got a couple of fun questions for you. One is, if you could go back in time to law firm you and tell her that, actually, no, let's go even further back. Let's go to like 18-year-old you, and she could see you now and how your life has unfolded. What do you think she would say?
Oh my goodness. I think she would be absolutely blown away. Like, just so surprised that it was possible, because you're really narrow-minded at that age and you're really unaware of the gray areas between the jobs that you think exist in the world, and you're racked with self-doubt and uncertainty about what's possible. And I remember seeing people who were doing things like I do now, who would come to speak, and I'd be like, oh, that's so fancy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to what happens when you do a lot of work on where you think your limits are in the world and just pushing through them, because you'll be really surprised that actually the more you surround yourself with people who have done stuff before, the more you realize anyone can just do stuff. Like, I mean, that sounds such an unintellectual way to say that, but it's such a democratic landscape now. You don't need qualifications to do anything, really. I mean, like outside of the professions and the technical areas, business particularly is so democratic. Very few people have qualifications in business before they become hugely successful business people. So I would be so surprised, but really excited that lay ahead.
And just on that point, would you say that the mindset piece is much more valuable than the qualifications?
1,000 times more. I would think if we could all get our mindset right, no one would need a qualification.
Isn't it crazy how many of us spend so many hours and so much money on these qualifications that are more and more every year that goes by, every generation, they're becoming more and more redundant?
Absolutely. But I also think it's a really expensive way to bide your time. But I do think that the adolescent brain needs more time. It
Yeah.
needs more time than high school to make the decisions that it is forced to make. So university for me was formative, probably more in the personal side of just getting older and traveling and learning to be independent than it was academic. So even if I don't use a lot of, or most of the subject matter of technical legal things now, some of it I do, but most of it I don't. I would not have done anything that I've done if I didn't do a university degree, just because of development and time. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say the same. I mean, I did a 3-year arts degree that led me to living in Italy and doing all these other things. It widened my awareness of things, but I think you have to go through a lot of that, what's knowing what you don't want to know what you do want. And you just have to experience life outside of high school, like as an adult, to then formulate those concepts and know even where you want to go.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said. I wouldn't have said this when I was at uni, but I think there's something to be said for the American system where you all just have to do a generalist degree for 3 years when you finish.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't be able to know if you want to do 7 years of law straight out of school. They don't let you make that decision because you are too young to sort of invest that early. Having said that, I thought that is definitely what I wanted to do. And I don't think I would have chosen anything differently, even after 3 years. But now looking back, I understand why they make you do that for 3 years, because you need to have that college experience, but you shouldn't be forced to make what you think at the time is a forever decision straight away.
Yeah. How funny is this? So I kind of tried to do that for myself. Like I did, that's why I did the arts degree. And I had the openness of, okay, maybe I'll go do law after. I actually thought I'd do law. I've got lawyers in the family, but having seen their lives, Sarah, and already seen that, for me, that just wasn't going to be my jam. And so
Wow.
I decided to become a naturopath and study naturopathy instead and nutrition.
Oh my gosh.
Which again,
Not the same at all.
not the same, and very much like choosing the path less traveled. But then, that's something that, again, I never thought I'd be able to be working the way I am now with such freedom and, all of that then. So it's incredible. Okay. Last fun question. If you could go back to your law firm self and give her a piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
So I find these questions really interesting because there's always something that I want to say, but I also have this view that I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't want to interrupt the pathway that I was on or give me any more insight than I had at the time, because I think I needed to have all the revelations that I had when I had them. I needed to make mistakes without the benefit of hindsight. I needed to try and test all the different things and figure out what I did like without someone giving me that information, from the future. So I probably wouldn't say anything, but if I had to choose something, I guess firstly, it would be, you're not as fancy as you think you are. Like, calm down. Calm down with the whole, I'm a fancy lawyer. It's, great to work 20 hours a day and getting really wrapped up in that whole success thing. It actually, interestingly for me, was never about money. It was very much about prestige and intellectual value. Like the intellect of law. There was like a bit of intellectual snobbery there. Um, but yeah, on a more serious note, I would probably say just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being open to everything. Just keep saying yes to everything. I did so many different committees. I did all, the BIW triathlon. Like I tried to network as widely as I could. I still kept going to lots of women in business events. Like I was just keeping doors open without even knowing why. I just say keep doing that, because so many of those relationships will be useful to you in 10 years time that you never could have expected, because a lot of those people who we networked as lawyers now network as ex-lawyers together. Like even if you can't see the immediate relevance of an activity, you just never know how it's going to be useful to you later. So keeping that open mind.
Yeah, so it's almost like keep doing what you're doing. And I have so much respect for that idea of nothing, there were no mistakes. There's no need to, like, when we have acceptance for our path and everything that's unfolded in our lives, that brings us so much peace, just it happened as it should have happened. And that's wonderful.
And you don't have regret, which really I think regret is quite a consuming emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And we don't want to have that. And we can do that. We just go, you know what? It has all unfolded perfectly. And if it doesn't make sense now, it will eventually. We always have those stages of our lives where we kind of go to that, oh, now it all makes sense. And then it all doesn't make sense for a bit, and it will again.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my God, I wish I could just keep talking to you forever. Such a delight. Thank you so much for sharing, Sarah. Tell me, lovely, where can we find you? Everyone that's been listening and they want to find some more of this energy.
I live on the internet, so find me on the internet somewhere. Everything is linked to Spoonful of Sarah on Instagram. So that's kind of the starting point, and then you can get to all the other things from there.
Fantastic. I'll have that in the show notes so everyone can find you nice and easily. Thank you so much, lovely. And I'm looking forward to connecting again.
Thank you so much. Have an amazing Easter.
Yeah, you too.
If you're ready for the deep dive into this work to master your anxious mind, I invite you to join the Anxiety Reset program. Over 90 days, I'll be guiding you on how to build your mental resilience, reprogram those limiting beliefs that keep you stuck in self-doubt, heal your gut, balance your hormones, nourish your mind, body, and soul. Using a combined approach of naturopathy, nutrition, hypnotherapy, and live group coaching with me, you'll feel supported and motivated to show up for yourself consistently day after day. And this is how you will experience extraordinary results. You can master your anxious mind. The best time to begin is right now. Let's do it together. You'll find the link to learn more in the show notes.
Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories, and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.